What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I just got out of seeing Mission Impossible Fallout, and not to worry, I will not go into any spoilers initially, but what I will say is that I do not expect to see a better action movie all year. I think it's Tom Cruise's best movie in many years. It wouldn't be that hard to make a strong case for it being the best in the Mission Impossible franchise, although I'm still very loyal to the one directed by Brian De Palma back in the 90s when I was a wee lad. And by wee lad, I mean 20 years old. But here I am, 42 years old, and Tom Cruise is not only still cranking out Mission Impossible movies, he's somehow finding ways to improve the formula over everything that's come before. In the past, I haven't actually been that colossal a fan of the Mission Impossible franchise. Too often I feel like the Mission Impossible movies evaporate in your imagination as soon as you walk out of the theater. Like, you remember certain action sequences, you remember certain character beats, but on the whole, the plots end up being kind of immaterial after a while. There were even some gags about it, I think in the second one, when Ving Rhames was commenting on how simplified the plot was in that particular movie. I think it was number 2, the John Woo one. In any case, this one was written and directed by Christopher McQuarrie, who directed the previous one. I think it's heads and shoulders better than the previous one. The character of Ethan Hunt is far more interesting this time around. The ensemble cast is fantastic. I mean, Christopher McQuarrie, I've been following his career since he wrote the screenplay for Usual Suspects way back in the mid-90s. So I'm completely thrilled to see his career as a director really finding its stride. So in the spirit of keeping things general, what can I say before I get into my spoilers? I'll say this: Rebecca Ferguson is absolutely on fire in this. There's something absolutely delightful about watching an exquisitely beautiful woman dressed in leather and a helmet, rocking out like a sniper rifle, just fucking people up. She's just an absolute delight to watch in action. Henry Cavill, Superman himself, more than holds his own in this. He's so physically strong at this point and has such a physically intimidating presence. He was an excellent addition to the cast and really handled the action scenes really well. But in that this is an action movie, the big question is, does it deliver the goods where it counts? And I would argue that there are 2 scenes where people are going to walk out of the theater just absolutely floored by what they saw. There's a hand-to-hand combat scene early in the movie that'll absolutely get you hooked. And then the finale is one of the most gorgeously shot, epic battle scenes in recent memory. The photography is worthy of something out of like a Christopher Nolan movie. My only knock on the movie would be that I felt the length. The movie is 147 minutes long, and I remember there's a certain point where I felt like we had reached the climax, then suddenly things died down, and there was like another 10 or 20 minutes of buildup before yet another climax. It by no means cripples the movie. It doesn't even really hold the movie back, but a 2.5-hour movie I feel like really needs to earn its length. I'm of the opinion that you can basically improve any movie by making it shorter, with a few exceptions. Like, I don't want anybody cutting anything out of The Godfather or Lawrence of Arabia. Those movies earn their length. And I'm more than happy to sit in my seat for 5 hours if you earn it. But that one minor quibble on my part is probably the only reason why I'm holding back on calling this a complete total home run. That said, it's pretty goddamn close. You're gonna have an absolute blast. And if you're a fan of the franchise, I mean, remember, I'm not even that big a fan of this franchise, but if you're a fan of the franchise, you're probably gonna be euphoric coming out of this movie. In any case, that's probably all I can say without going into spoiler territory. So this is my last warning. Let's talk about some specifics. So as I mentioned before, the things that are most important about these Mission Impossible movies are great heroic character beats, as well as extraordinary action set pieces. And this movie has both in abundance. But there's one action scene early on that's so good, it's almost impossible for the rest of the movie to measure up favorably. At this point, Ethan Hunt and August Walker, played by Henry Cavill, are working together, and they're trying to apprehend somebody in a bathroom so that Ethan can copy his face. And the result is a fight scene that is so badass. I mean, you basically have to like sweep your jaw off the floor afterwards. The choreography is just exquisite. You get nice long takes. You can actually see the action. There's no shaky cam bullshit. There's no rapid cutting after every single punch. You actually get to see the battle unfold. And I wish I knew the name of the stuntman that Henry Cavill and Tom Cruise are fighting, because he beats the hell out of them. I mean, he completely, totally destroys them. They're throwing everything they got at him. And he's just like, it's like Jackie Chan and Jet Li and Bruce Lee somehow like spliced all their DNA together and just created this ultimate super badass. But it was one of those situations where the audience was just screaming and roaring and reacting. It was a hell of a lot of fun to be in the crowd during that particular action scene. It reminded me quite a bit actually of the bathroom scene from the James Cameron film True Lies. However, as much as I love James Cameron and as much as I love Arnold Schwarzenegger, I have to say, this bathroom scene destroys the one in True Lies. But the movie's not just about action. It has this incredible atmosphere and style that feels like the best TV show you've ever seen, but on steroids. During the opening credit sequence, it feels a little bit like a TV show because they're showing clips, and they're showing clips from the movie that you're about to see. But it's just brief flashes. It's not giving anything away, but it really does feel like you're watching a show where you're seeing highlights from all the best episodes. I never followed Mission Impossible back in the day. I've only seen the movies. I mean, I can remember seeing ads as a kid, and I can remember the unmistakable Layla Schifrin theme music, so I can only assume assume that they were going for a similar vibe to what the TV show had back in the day. But here's what I really loved about this movie. It's starting to have a lot more continuity with the other Mission Impossible movies. Obviously, you have a recurring cast of characters. You have some plot lines that travel from one movie to the next. But this one really felt like a continuation of the previous movie, and it allowed me to get a lot more emotionally invested in the characters. Ving Rhames and Simon Pegg are absolutely incredible as Tom Cruise's wingmen, and I was delighted to see that Rebecca Ferguson appears to be becoming a permanent member of their team. And for a large chunk of the movie, Henry Cavill is a member of their team. He's kind of foisted upon him by the CIA as an observer, with the understanding that if at any point he sees something he doesn't like, he can basically take out Ethan Hunt then and there. But he is a total badass in his own right and a really useful member of the team until he obviously reveals himself to be in league with the bad guys, which leads to just this absolutely insane face-off between Henry Cavill and Tom Cruise at the top of a cliff at the end. Henry Cavill with like half his face melted off, and they're just throwing down. They're all bruised and battered from a helicopter crash. It's really sensational, epic stuff. And while I do like seeing Henry Cavill as Superman in the DC Extended Universe, after seeing him in this, he might want to consider playing more bad guys in the future. Some actors just have a dark side or a villainous streak, and roles like this I feel like are kind of Henry Cavill's bread and butter. And speaking of which, I actually think Tom Cruise is better when he's playing slightly villainous characters or outright villainous characters. I mean, movies like Collateral, or comedies like Tropic Thunder, or Magnolia, or even The Color of Money, where he has plenty of character flaws. And that's one of the reasons that I haven't embraced the Mission Impossible movies in the past. I always felt like Ethan Hunt as a character, which is a little bit bland and a little bit vanilla. That said, they finally found a way to make his superheroics really interesting. They basically injected a little bit of soul into his character, where we finally come to realize that faced with the choice of saving one life or a million lives, Ethan Hunt does not regard that as a choice at all. No matter what it takes, no matter what he has to figure out, no matter what act of self-sacrifice is required, he's going to find a way to save all the above. And in this really sinister, cynical world of secret agents and assassins and terrorists, he's probably the one person who does have that moral fiber. It's also incredible to see Tom Cruise at 56 years old, still jumping off rooftops, still climbing up cliffs, still doing incredible stunt work. I mean, obviously he's not capable of doing all of his stunts, but he very famously broke his leg during a chase scene near St. Paul's Cathedral in this movie, and then to shut the movie down for 9 weeks. Granted, he came back after 7, but it was an $80 million insurance claim to cover all the lost time and money. If there's ever been a perfect case study as to why movies need insurance, surely that is it. But what's always fun about these Mission Impossible movies are the scenes involving disguises. Obviously, those masks take us into very strange sci-fi territory, and I think it's a testament to the power of these movies that we just buy it, that these masks function as well as they do. But there are 2 major mask reveal sequences in this movie. One's early on where they're trying to get information out of a terrorist, and they basically make him believe as if Mecca, Jerusalem, and Rome have all been annihilated by nuclear attack. And they trick him having Simon Pegg pose as Wolf Blitzer, reading his demands on CNN in order to get the information they need before all the walls just collapse and they see that they're basically on a make-believe set that they've constructed to fool them. That scene for me was a little obvious. I feel like they showed their hand a little bit, having Rome and Jerusalem and Mecca be totally gone. I was like, you know, that new status quo would be very hard to maintain in these movies moving forward. So that one I was able to see coming from about maybe half mile away. But there's an amazing scene about 2/3 of the way through the movie that totally caught me off guard, totally floored me. And I like how these movies, it's almost like you're playing poker with somebody where they're concealing things until the very last minute. And oftentimes Ethan Hunt will tell the characters around him, I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure it out. And he'll act as if he doesn't have a plan. And then much to our delight and surprise, like 20 or 30 minutes later, we realize that it's all been an act of subterfuge and that he's known what he's doing all along. And with a quick bit of exposition, they'll bring us up to speed. But I think this movie handled that bit of sleight of hand particularly well. And the last thing I'll say, I think this is actually the sexiest of the Mission Impossible franchise. And I don't mean that in terms of like great lovemaking sequences or nudity or anything along those lines. There's just a certain attitude and a certain manner in which these characters carry themselves that just exudes sexual confidence. A perfect example would be the character White Widow, played by Vanessa Kirby. And it's not just that she's stunningly beautiful, it's the way that she uses that in negotiations or to gain influence, or just to keep people on their heels. For a large chunk of the movie, she's operating under the assumption that Tom Cruise is actually a villain, and at one point when she's giving him some orders, particular assignment, she ends the assignment with this really aggressive kiss on the mouth. It reminds me quite a bit of the sex appeal of some of the early James Bond movies from the 60s. By today's standards, a lot of the quote-unquote sex scenes in those movies are pretty chaste, but there's just a sexual energy or sexual tension or dynamism to those movies that I find really appealing. And Rebecca Ferguson and Michelle Monaghan absolutely make contributions on that front as well. So I think that's about all I have to say. I mean, it is my sincere wish that Tom Cruise continues to work in this franchise as long as he wishes to, as long as he's finding filmmakers like Christopher McQuarrie who are really going to bring their A game. We've seen how actors like Denzel Washington or Liam Neeson or Clint Eastwood or Charles Bronson can go on making these action movies till well into their 60s and 70s. And also, Tom Cruise, he might be 56, but he looks like he's 30. He's 8 years older than Simon Pegg, but Simon Pegg looks like he could be his dad. So if you're at all on the fence about seeing this movie, I 100% urge everybody to go. If you're already a fan of the franchise, you don't need this review to convince you. You're probably at the theater right now. But I had an absolute blast. Like I said at the beginning, in terms of pure action spectacle, I don't expect to see a better movie in this genre all year long. If I do, that'd be a great surprise, but my itch for action entertainment has been well and thoroughly scratched by this wildly entertaining movie. So if you enjoyed my reaction review, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would really appreciate it. And if you want to talk more, you can hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax, or just leave me a comment in the comments below, but I'll be back at y'all in the very near future. Onwards and upwards.